What if I told you the biggest global power shift since World War II isn't happening on a battlefield in a parliament or at the United Nations, but deep inside the world's financial system unfolding quietly in transactions, trade routes, and currency flows? Welcome to FINSFAR, where money isn't just saved, spent, or invested, it's understood. From financial history to modern market truths, we turn real stories into lessons that protect your future. Right now, the entire structure that has held the world together for 80 years, the dollar-led global order born in 1944, is being challenged in ways no one alive has ever seen before. For decades, the United States controlled global finance through the Bretton Woods system, the rise of the dollar, the petrodollar agreement, and the dominance of Western institutions like SWIFT, the IMF, and the World Bank. But today, new coalitions are forming, new alliances are expanding, and new financial systems are emerging, all moving toward one outcome: a multipolar financial world, where America no longer stands alone at the top. BRICS expansion, Saudi Arabia's shift toward non-dollar oil trade, China's digital payment empire, Russia's commodity-backed strategy, Africa's economic awakening, and a historic gold accumulation race have created a pressure point the West can't reverse. Young people today are witnessing the same kind of systemic shift their great-grandparents saw when the British pound lost its crown to the dollar. But this time, the transition is faster, quieter, and far more global. And the most shocking part? The US didn't lose dominance because someone attacked it. It's losing because the world is outgrowing the system America built. So now the critical questions appear. What specific force started this power shift? And why is it accelerating right now with a speed that even economists didn't predict? And as the world transitions from one financial leader to many, what does this turning point mean for your future, your opportunities, and your economic security? What single event pushed the global system to finally break away from the dollar as dominance after nearly 80 years of dependence? It wasn't a war, a political speech, or a financial crash. It was the moment the United States froze Russia as foreign reserves in 2022. That decision sent a message louder than any missile or sanction. The dollar was no longer just a currency, it was a geopolitical weapon. And for countries around the world, especially those with their own strategic vulnerabilities, this was the breaking point. Suddenly every nation asked the same terrifying question: if the US can freeze Russia's reserves, what stops them from doing it to us? That single realization shattered decades of financial trust. Countries that once relied on the dollar for safety now saw it as potential risk. China accelerated its yuan payment systems. India expanded its rupee settlement channels. Saudi Arabia began accepting non-dollar currencies. Africa negotiated trade deals outside Western frameworks. And BRICS, once a symbolic group, became the center of a real financial rebellion. The US expected pushback. What it didn't expect was how fast the world would move. Like dominoes, nations began diversifying reserves, reducing treasury holdings, buying gold at record levels, and linking their financial futures to emerging blocs rather than the old Western order. This was the trigger the world needed, a moment that revealed the danger of depending on a single superpower-controlled currency. For young people, here awaits the deeper truth: global power doesn't shift because countries want change. It shifts when they realize they have no choice but to adapt. And now another crucial question emerges. If the breaking point exposed the dollar's risk, what new alliances are rising to fill the gap? And why are these alliances expanding faster than any financial coalition since World War II? How did a group that once seemed like a loose coalition suddenly become the fastest growing financial alliance in the world? The answer lies in the speed, strategy, and scale of BRICS' transformation. Before 2020, BRICS was mostly symbolic, a political gathering of emerging economies. But after the global financial shock, sanctions weaponization, and the erosion of trust in Western systems, BRICS evolved into something entirely different. A blueprint for a world no longer led by one currency or one power. The expansion was explosive. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, Iran, Ethiopia, and others joined or signaled readiness. Nations across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia lined up to participate in new payment rails, trade networks, and development channels. BRICS instantly became a megabloc controlling more oil than OPEC+, more population than the entire Western world combined, and more natural resources than any alliance in history. What makes this alliance grow so quickly? Simplicity. It gives countries what they've been denied for decades: financial independence, cheaper trade, political neutrality, and an alternative to the dollar system. For many nations, joining BRICS is not rebellion, it's protection. The alliance offers gold-linked strategies, non-dollar settlement systems, and development loans without political strings. It's everything emerging economies wanted but never received from the West. And for young people watching, understand this: when a new power center forms, global rules shift quickly. Trade routes realign, Currencies compete, markets transform, opportunities move. This is not the rise of another group. It is the formation of a rival financial world, which leads directly to the next critical question. What new economic weapons is BRICS building to challenge Western dominance? And which one has the potential to permanently alter the balance of global power? What is the single economic weapon BRICS is building that has Western leaders more alarmed than anything they'd have seen in decades? It is not a traditional currency, not a military tool, and not a trade agreement. It is a complete financial architecture designed to function without the dollar, without SWIFT, and without Western approval. At the center of this weapon is the BRICS Integrated Settlement System, a multi-layered digital network that connects national payment systems from China, Russia, India, Brazil, and the Middle East into one seamless platform. This is not a competitor to SWIFT. It is a replacement. It allows nations to buy oil, sell commodities, settle trade, and move capital using local currencies or commodity-backed units rather than dollars. And the most dangerous part for the West is this: the system cannot be sanctioned, frozen, or controlled externally. It operates outside the Western banking choke points that gave the US and Europe power for decades. Nations under pressure now have a financial safe exit. Nations seeking independence now have an alternative system. And nations tired of dollar volatility now have stability through gold-anchored and commodity-linked settlement options. This economic weapon is so powerful because it attacks the core strength of the West, not its military, but its monetary dominance. Just as Bretton Woods defined the post-World War II era, BRICS' financial platform is defining the new one. For young people, here's the reality. Wars today are fought through currencies, sanctions, and payment systems, not tanks. And BRICS has just built a new battlefield where the West cannot dictate the rules. Which raises the next crucial question. How will this new system reshape global trade routes in energy, agriculture, technology, and minerals? And what happens when countries begin choosing BRICS pathways over Western ones? Not out of ideology, but out of pure economic advantage? What happens when the world no longer needs the dollar to move oil, wheat, microchips, or minerals? You get a silent redrawing of global trade routes, one of the clearest signs that a historic power shift is underway. For decades, trade flowed through Western-controlled channels. Oil priced in dollars, shipping insured in London, payments cleared through SWIFT, commodity markets anchored in New York and Chicago. But with the rise of the BRICS financial architecture, these old choke points are losing force. Now oil from Saudi Arabia to China is settling in yuan. Russian gas to India is priced in rupees. African minerals are moving through BRICS payment rails. South American agriculture is increasingly traded through local currency agreements. Each of these deals seems small in isolation until you zoom out. Together, they form new trade corridors that bypass the dollar entirely. The map of global commerce is shifting away from a single financial center and toward a multipolar network. And when trade routes change, power changes. Historically, the Silk Road shifted power to Asia. The Age of Discovery shifted power to Europe. The 20th century dollar system shifted power to America. In the 21st century, BRICS might be executing the next shift. For young people, here's why this matters. Industries follow trade routes. Jobs follow industries. Wealth follows jobs. And as new routes strengthen, from the Gulf to China, from Africa to India, from Brazil to Southeast Asia, economic opportunity begins moving with them. Western dominance was built on controlling trade flows. BRICS is dismantling that monopoly one transaction at a time. Which brings us to the next pressing question. What happens when energy, the world's most strategic resource, becomes anchored to this new system? And how could the global power balance flip once oil itself stops depending on the dollar? What happens when the world's most strategic resource, oil, no longer relies on the US dollar? That's the moment every economist fears and every BRICS nation has been preparing for, because oil isn't just another commodity. It is the foundation of the global financial system. Ever since the 1970s, every country on Earth needed dollars to buy oil. That single rule, known as the petrodollar system, created endless global demand for the dollar, letting the US borrow cheaply, print freely, and project power worldwide. But now, for the first time in 50 years, that rule is dissolving. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Russia, Iran, and other major producers inside or aligned with BRICS are increasingly trading oil in yuan, rupees, and other local currencies. And under the new BRICS financial alliance, oil can settle through their own payment networks without SWIFT, without Western banks, and without the dollar. This is not a theory. It's already happening. When oil stops depending on the dollar, countries no longer need massive dollar reserves. That means fewer dollars held abroad, fewer US bonds purchased, and less global support for America's debt-heavy economy. In other words, the US loses its financial superpower glow. For young people, understand this clearly. The day oil moves away from the dollar is the day the world officially enters a new financial era. Energy is leverage, And BRICS just took a huge portion of that leverage away from the United States. Once oil flows outside the dollar system, everything else follows. Gas, metals, food, shipping, manufacturing. Which leads us to the next massive shift. If energy is breaking free from the dollar, what happens when technology and digital infrastructure join the BRICS revolution too? And how will the next wave of innovation help accelerate the biggest power shift since World War II? What happens when the world's fastest growing technologies stop flowing through Western-controlled systems and begin powering BRICS rise instead? You get the accelerant that turns a financial shift into a global power transformation. Technology, not armies, not treaties, is now the real engine of influence, and BRICS understands this better than anyone. Across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, BRICS nations are building a parallel digital universe designed to bypass Western platforms entirely. China leads with its digital yuan infrastructure, 5G dominance, and AI-driven payment systems. India brings biometric ID networks, digital public goods, and a tech workforce larger than most countries' populations. Brazil is pioneering fintech solutions that are now being integrated into BRICS rails. Russia contributes cybersecurity, blockchain development, and digital trade verification systems. And the Gulf states add capital, energy-backed digital tokens, and sovereign wealth funds that invest strategically in BRICS tech corridors. Put these pieces together, and you get something the West cannot slow down: a self-reinforcing digital ecosystem that strengthens BRICS trade, protects BRICS settlements, and gives developing nations cheap, fast, and sanction-proof digital finance tools. This is where the power shift becomes unstoppable. Because once countries join a new digital system, whether for payments, identity, logistics, or trade, they rarely go back. Digital infrastructure becomes economic gravity. For young people here, that's the truth. The next global winners won to be the nations with the strongest armies. They will be the ones with the strongest algorithms, the most resilient networks, and the fastest digital rails. And right now, BRICS is building a world where digital innovation and financial independence go hand in hand. Which brings us to the next critical turning point. If BRICS controls the future of digital finance and global energy flows, what role will Africa, one of the youngest, fastest growing regions on Earth, play in completing this historic shift? And how will Africa's rise accelerate the decline of Western economic dominance even further? Why is Africa becoming the decisive factor in the biggest global power shift since World War II? Because Africa holds the one advantage no Western nation or BRICS member can replicate: the future. With the world's fastest growing population, massive untapped resources, emerging manufacturing hubs, and rising digital adoption, Africa is becoming the geopolitical prize every power bloc wants. But BRICS is the one capturing it. For decades, Africa operated inside Western financial structures, borrowing from the IMF and World Bank, trading through dollar systems, and depending on Western markets. But that dependency came with high interest, political conditions, and limited sovereignty. BRICS offered a different path: loans without interference, trade in local or BRICS currencies, infrastructure partnerships, and digital finance tools that bypass slow, expensive Western systems. Countries like Ethiopia, Egypt, and South Africa are already inside BRICS. Nigeria, Kenya, Algeria, Angola, and Tanzania are deepening economic cooperation. And dozens of African nations have signed on to BRICS payment rails. Why does this matter? Because Africa controls cobalt, lithium, gold, rare earth minerals, agriculture, renewable energy potential, and future consumer markets. The West built its 20th century dominance on Middle Eastern oil. BRICS is building its 21st century rise on African minerals and markets. And here's the part young people need to understand. When the future population, the future resources, and the future digital infrastructure all align with one financial system, that system becomes unstoppable. Africa is giving BRICS scale, resilience, and long-term momentum. Western economies, aging, saturated, and debt-heavy, cannot compete with Africa's growth curve, which now forces the next critical question. How is the West responding as BRICS forms an unbreakable supply chain from energy to minerals to manufacturing? And what financial shock could hit the world once this new super network becomes stronger than the Western-led system for the first time in modern history? What happens when the West suddenly realizes that BRICS isn't just expanding, it's building a fully integrated economic network stronger than anything the US or Europe can block? You get a response driven not by confidence, but by quiet panic. Western leaders are watching supply chains they once controlled shift toward Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. They're watching global trade reroute onto BRICS payment systems. They're watching gold reserves move east, energy markets de-dollarize, and emerging nations seek financing outside the IMF and World Bank. The West is trying to counter this in three ways. First, by tightening alliances, strengthening NATO, reviving trade partnerships, and pulling countries back into US-centric agreements. Second, by accelerating digital regulation and attempting to limit the global spread of BRICS payment systems. And third, by leaning heavily on the dollar's existing influence to discourage nations from diversifying. But here's the problem. None of these strategies stop the structural shift happening beneath the surface. Western economies are aging, debt levels are exploding, political divisions are widening. Meanwhile, BRICS nations are young, industrializing, resource-rich, and increasingly united through technology and shared financial infrastructure. This imbalance creates a shock the West cannot fully prepare for. The moment when global markets no longer see Western systems as the default and begin treating BRICS networks as equal or even superior options. When that happens, capital flows shift. Investment patterns recalibrate. The dollar loses automatic privilege, and the world officially enters a multipolar financial era. For young people, this is the turning point that will define your generation. The institutions that shaped the post-World War II world, NATO, SWIFT, the IMF, the dollar system, are losing their monopoly. So now the final and most important question emerges: what does this new world mean for your future? And how can you prepare for the economic reality that comes next? What does the biggest power shift since World War II truly mean for your future, your opportunities, and your financial security? It means you are stepping into a world fundamentally different from the one your parents grew up in. A world where the US and Europe no longer control the global economy, where the dollar no longer dictates the rules, and where BRICS-led systems create new pathways of growth, trade, and influence. The world is not collapsing, it's reorganizing. But reorganizations are disruptive. Careers change, industries move, wealth shifts, nations rise or fall based on how well they adapt. For young people, the winners of the next era will be those who understand three realities. First, global opportunities are moving east and south toward Asia's manufacturing hubs, Africa's resource markets, and the Middle East's energy fintech alliances. Second, currencies and financial systems are becoming multipolar, meaning you can no longer depend on one currency, one economy, or one region to define global stability. Third, digital infrastructure is becoming the new foundation of power, and the nations that control digital finance, data flows, and payment networks will shape the future economy. So where does that leave you? In a position of incredible advantage if you understand the change early. Learn the industries building the next world: digital finance, renewable energy, supply chain tech, commodity markets, and cross-border payments. Diversify your knowledge, your income, and your exposure. Don't rely on one system when the world is clearly shifting to many. This is the first time in history where young people can participate in a power transition as it's happening, not decades after it's over. Thanks for watching FINSFAR. Remember, your mindset is your greatest asset. Don't forget to explore more videos to master your money. The question now is simple but life-changing. Will you adapt to the new global order forming right now, or cling to a world that no longer exists? Because the next decade will belong to those who see the shift and act on it.